Commissioner Donaldson?
Here.
Commissioner Hoff?
Here.
We expect Commissioner Coomerly shortly. Commissioner Sherman?
Here.
Commissioner Steinberg?
Present.
Vice Chair Cardoza?
Here.
Chair Flores?
Here.
6 commissioners are present.
Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, welcome everybody. Looks like we have 4 items on the agenda. One's been removed from public hearing. Item B, Christie Avenue medical use. If you're here for that, it has been removed, and Charlie might report on that in his director's report. This is a moment for anybody to make any comments on items not on the agenda. Anybody like to make any comments not on the agenda? Seeing none, go to action recap. Any motions on the action? Any changes?
I'd like to make a motion that we approve the recap.
A second?
Motion by Stephen, second by
Okay, so
John.
without objection.
Without objection.
Well, I
What?
was not
As far
here,
as
so I
Oh,
have
okay.
no
to
Oh,
comment.
2
abstain.
abstains.
And Commissioner Hoff also was not here, I believe, right?
Yeah, 2 abstentions
So 2 abstentions,
and 1 absent.
1
But we
absent.
still passes. Well, I'll assume Vanessa will walk in any second now.
Right.
All right, director's report.
Okay. Well, first with regard to the City Council and what they have done since your last meeting, they met on March 1st and on March 15th. On March 1st, the Redevelopment Agency, the Public Financing Authority, and the City Council held a special meeting, and at that point they decided not to proceed with the issuance of revenue bonds to finance redevelopment activities, as I previously had reported to you that they had authorized. Because of the uncertainty in the bond market right now created by the proposed legislation to eliminate redevelopment in California. So everything is in flux right now, and we may or may not be issuing revenue bonds in the future, depending on what happens. The council on March 1st passed a resolution of intention to vacate a portion of Stanford Avenue to facilitate the property swap with the owners of 5701 Hollis Street of the city parking lot for a wider greenway. This, as you recall, was approved, recommended for approval by the commission at your January meeting. On March 15th, as Chair Flores noted, the 5900 Christie building was authorized by the agency for purchase by the agency. That's an office building at the corner of 59th and Christie, just west of the public market. That was on tonight's agenda for a use permit for medical offices, but it has been continued pending the outcome of those purchase negotiations. And finally, on March 15th, the council approved a construction noise waiver for the Krubiner Modular Home for 1 weekend between June 11th and September 4th this summer for assembly of this modular home at 5507 Beaudry Street. As some of you may recall, who were on the commission at the time, this project was approved by the commission 3 years ago in February of 2008. And we expect it to be somewhat of a happening for the community when this house is all put together in one day. 5 pieces coming from San Jose, trucked in and being all assembled in one day on Beaudry Street. We don't know the exact date right now. It's sometime between June and September, but we'll let you know when it is.
Please.
Yeah, email us when that happens. That'd be exciting.
Yeah. We're continuing to work on the zoning ordinance update. We've completed our initial review of the base and overlay zones, including the matrix of uses, the subdivision regulations, and the use classifications, and we've completed our final review of the zoning maps. We're currently undertaking our final review of the administration procedures, and we've begun our review of the non-conforming use regulations. The introductory provisions, the terms and definitions, and the other regulations and standards are still on our to-do list, but there is light at the end of the tunnel. We are getting there. The next meeting of the steering committee will be April 26th, at which time we will give a progress report and where we are at that point, and more progress will have been made by then. The U.S. Census Bureau has released the first cut of the 2010 census data, and there is a handout in front of you on the dais. Looks like this. This is the data we have so far, and it's really preliminary. I mean, the numbers are final, but the amount of data is not very extensive at this point. Right now we have population, over 18 and under 18 in total, and then population by race, Hispanic and not Hispanic, and total number of housing units and occupied housing units. In the future, they'll be rolling out more detailed data, breaking it down further by race and age and gender and housing tenure and other such items. For the first time, Emeryville has been broken into 4 census tracts. So what you have here is the total for the city, and then the next 4 pages are of each of the 4 census tracts. The total population is 10,080, and the total number of housing units is 6,646. I realized after I printed this that I neglected to put the where these census tracts are on here. I thought I had it on here, but apparently it's not. So just so you know, on the first page it says Census Tract 4251.01. That is the peninsula west of the freeway. 02 is the bayfront area between the railroad and the freeway. 03 is east of the railroad and north of 53rd Street, basically the North Hollis area and the Doyle Street neighborhood. And 04 is east of the railroad and south of 53rd Street. So that's the South Hollis area, the Park Avenue district, the Triangle neighborhood, and the southern part of town. As I say, there will be more census data coming out in future months. On the sustainable community strategy, ABAG and MTC have released the long-awaited initial vision scenario for the sustainable community strategy, which is required by SB 375. It calls for accommodating about 2 million more people in the region by 2035, and it gives population and job projections for each city and county in the region. The projections for Emeryville are considerably higher than what's accommodated by our general plan. There was a briefing for the Alameda County Planning Directors last Friday and a briefing for the elected officials this afternoon. We're going to be giving an informational report on this to the City Council at their next meeting on April 5th, and we will provide that same briefing to you at your next meeting on April 28th. We didn't have it ready in time for tonight's meeting. As you may have heard, there's a meeting happening right now downstairs. DTSC is hosting a community meeting in the garden level on the draft community safety plan for cleanup of the Sherwin-Williams site. And that's with all the people who will be involved in both carrying out and monitoring the cleanup. It is unfortunate timing that DTSC planned the meeting for the same time as this meeting. And none of my staff is able to be there because they're all here. We all have items on tonight's agenda, but other city people are at the meeting and are keeping tabs on it. The cleanup is expected to begin in April or May. And finally, as I'm sure you've noticed, we are not having a Housing Advisory and Appeal Board meeting tonight. That has been postponed indefinitely. And the reason for that is that city abatement of the property in question would be carried out using redevelopment funds. And at this point, we don't know if we are going to have redevelopment funds. So there's no point pursuing abatement if we don't know if we'll be able to carry out the cleanup. If it looks like this funding will become available, then we will reschedule the Housing Advisory and Appeal Board meeting for a future date. And that concludes my report. I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Charlie. How long is the Sherman-Williams meeting you think going to go for?
I don't recall. I know it started at 6:30. I imagine it's probably a couple hours. I doubt if it'll still be going on when we end here. But
and do you have a
maybe.
2-second update on Pixar's project there? I noticed some changes in the construction.
I have heard that they've applied for a temporary certificate of occupancy. I'm not sure where that is. Where's Miro? Have you signed it off?
I I've signed it off.
Miro has signed off the temporary certificate of occupancy, and they're expecting it either by the end of this week, which would be tomorrow, or early next week.
Great.
So they're coming along. Obviously, it's not completely finished. You can see the landscaping is still in progress, and the park is still under construction, but they're pretty close. And they won't get their final certificate of occupancy until everything is completely finished.
Sure. Any more questions for Charlie or staff? Okay, we have one study session, a sustainable transportation plan, which Diana Keaton will be presenting, and then we'll have 3 public hearings after that. So Diana.
So tonight we have a study session on the long-awaited sustainable transportation plan. And we have Linda Ryan here from Nelson Nygaard to give a presentation, and then I'll talk a little bit about how that plan relates to the general plan and other things we're doing in town and AC Transit.
Could you pull the microphone down a little bit? We can't hear you. Thanks.
Oh, there we go. Okay. So after Linda Ryan from Nelson Nygaard presents the plan, I will talk about the 2 handouts that you have. One is a letter from AC Transit, and one is how their strategy recommendations relate to our general plan and other things we're doing around here. So let's... Here's Linda Ryan of Nelson Nygaard.
Good evening. Thank you very much. I'm going to present the draft administrative transportation plan, and let's see. Okay, good. This plan is really, the purpose of the plan is to develop a more balanced transportation system in Emeryville. It's really designed to shift from a more auto-dominated city to more transit, biking, pedestrian, walking, ride-sharing environment. The little graphic at the bottom sort of shows where today on the left, the chart shows the driving alones at the bottom. Where we want to move is driving alone on the top. Not to say driving is not going to be an important mode, but a more balanced transportation system is really the goal of this plan. The intended outcome is to develop a feasible and practical plan. This is not intended to be one of those plans that's going to sit on the shelf, but one that has phased recommendations that could be implemented, some in the short term and some are intended for longer term time frame. The plan began, as Diana said, it's been around, we've been working on this for several years. It started about in the spring of 2008 when the study was initiated. At that first summer, we had a retreat with the Emeryville TMA. Many of the early meetings on this plan collaborated with the update of your general plan. We conducted stakeholder interviews, some of the city council members, I think some of you also, as well as key stakeholders throughout the community. We came up with our drafts transportation strategies about a year ago, and we had an open house. It was unfortunately sort of like a night like tonight. We've gotten some feedback, and what we're presenting to you today is the draft plan. I want to go back a little and talk about what we saw as some of the major needs and the priorities. Well, the first is really to create and support a balanced transportation system. This was really emphasized over and over again that it needs to be multimodal, it needs to be balanced. Addressing pedestrian safety and connectivity issues was another high priority. And even though there's lots of public transit services, the plan focuses on some targeted improvements to the existing services in Emeryville today. Consistent with your general plan and other planning efforts underway to support a walkable environment and support biking and development that continues to be infill development and appropriate design. And many members early on when we spoke to city council and other business leaders said, we really want this plan to be more of a carrot, not stick approach. The plan recommends a series of 6 strategies, and I'll talk about each one. One of the things I won't have time to get into, since I know I'm not supposed to spend too much time presenting this report, but included in the draft report for each strategy is a recommended time frame, whether it's short-term, longer term. We identified who would be the likely lead agency. Obviously, the city of Emeryville for many. Some it would be the TMA, some the transit agencies or partnerships. We also identified a cost range and proposed some identified funding strategies, some grants, and most of which are discretionary, but some funding sources that could be available. Just starting with some of the strategies, I'm not going to go through each one on this bullet list. I think it would take too long. But on the transit, as I said, you have a wealth of transit services here in Emeryville today. We've worked closely with AC Transit and Emory Go Around through the TMA, and we're proposing some minor rerouting, mainly to improve access to the BART station, timing with BART schedules, enhanced transit information at the centers. We're also looking at a bus-only lane on Hollis Street that would help move transit faster, not get stuck during peak periods, and to improve operations at San Pablo Avenue. One of our longer-term recommendations, we heard this was popular, but certainly not short-term, but longer-term, study the feasibility of a streetcar service to extend to the MacArthur BART station. Transit demand management strategies, or TDM, it's sort of a fancy term we planners use, but it's really looking at how to increase the efficiency of the existing transportation network, primarily low-cost measures. There are currently 2 sites for casual carpooling here in Emeryville. I'm sure many of you are familiar. It's sort of an organic system that has grown. One's at 64th and Christie, the other's out in the marina. But we think there's an opportunity to further promote casual carpooling. It's something that's increasingly popular with the bridge tolls. We think that there's opportunities to expand some locations. There's also Zipcar pods here in Emeryville. There are 6 Zipcards, but we think there's opportunities there to also expand and incentivize and further incentivize car sharing programs. We talk further in the report about how car sharing could even be used for the city of Emeryville vehicle fleet, which is something that other cities have done as a way to reduce your fleet and reduce some maintenance cost. We recommend considering implementation of a bicycle sharing demonstration program. This would allow folks who travel from their employment site to a meeting elsewhere to use a bike during the day. We have several examples, I should say, of all of the strategies that we're recommending. In the report, we've included examples and best practices where these are in place in other cities in California and elsewhere. And to promote the AC Transit Easy Pass program with some of your major employers like Novartis or Pixar, which provides a discount group pass for folks to buy AC Transit passes. We also include a section on parking strategies, and I know you, about a year ago, completed a parking study in the North Hollis area. We're sort of building somewhat on that. And parking, while you think parking may not be exactly TDM or sustainable, it's really important for parking strategies to be considered because they, of course, will influence folks' travel choices. So one of the things we're recommending is to reduce or incentivize your parking in lieu fee. Emeryville has one today, I believe, and I'm looking at Diane, I think it's $7,300. And what this is for development in lieu of providing parking, you can pay a fee. And we're thinking what we're recommending is this fee be expanded or incentivized to take greater use of it here where there may be an oversupply of parking in the city. Another parking strategy I want to call out is to incentivize or mandate shared parking for different land uses. While the city supports multiple uses for parking using movie theaters or other private businesses where they're not utilizing the parking have shared parking, but we really think that this is something that could be expanded on. And the last one I want to point out is the parking strategy to require employers to cash out parking subsidies to employees. This is a state law that all employers that have 50 or more employees provide an option for employees who don't use the parking space to provide either cash or other incentives to encourage transit rather than driving to the workplace. I know you're in the midst of, I'm not sure what your schedule is, but you're preparing a bicycle pedestrian master plan. So we are a little premature, but we've identified a couple pedestrian and bicycle strategies I just want to point out. One is to develop a street design guidelines or manual. Most cities rely on the state or the federal guidelines, but we think it can be very valuable to tailor a guideline to the conditions here in Emeryville, and we recommend that you do that. Another pedestrian strategy that I think is just very practical is to establish pedestrian programs. Some of your neighboring cities, Oakland had an organized walk last year that was very successful. San Francisco has street closure festival every year, and other cities have organized walks to promote walking. We encourage you to establish pedestrian programs, and also consider the other one I think just worth mentioning is to evaluate the ability to maintain and enhance existing facilities through some online. There is a new program called C-Fix. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it enables residents anonymously to report things, and I think this is something that you might want to expand and promote here in Emeryville. Bicycle strategies. Again, I know you're in the process of updating your plan, and a couple that I'm sure will come out in your bicycle and pedestrian master plan, I just want to emphasize we believe is very important, is to establish bicycle stations near transit hubs. There's bicycle parking, but the easier, convenient, more secure stations, obviously bike parking, people are going to consider biking to and from BART station. And implement diverters and other traffic calming devices. There's several streets that are designated both bike and transit, and they're done so because there's very few cars relative to other streets in Emeryville. And those are the streets where, as a bicyclist myself, I know it's great because it is a bike boulevard, but many cars travel at very fast speeds, so we're encouraging you to consider speed humps and bus bulb outs and other devices to try to slow down traffic. Wayfinding's the last strategy. My understanding is you started a wayfinding program here several years ago. This sign here and this is one of them, but it was not completed primarily due to funding constraints. But we encourage you to reinstitute a wayfinding program as funding becomes available. It's really important because the city has many diverters. People can't find where does the bike trail begin or where is the Amtrak station, and wayfinding is very, very helpful. And so we've recommended a series of wayfinding strategies. One of the things that I think would be very helpful is to ensure that your wayfinding is consistent with neighboring Berkeley. As an example, there are purple bike signs. You could continue further into Emeryville and working with your neighboring cities to make sure you have a wayfinding program to direct people to various alternative forms of transportation. The plan is in draft form. Today is a planning session. Following my presentation, Diana's going to talk about how some of the strategies in this plan complement the general plan. The next step is to go to City Council for a study session the 3rd of May. We'll continuing to accept comments. If you haven't had a chance to review the report and want to give us comments, we'd be delighted to receive them. There'll be a hearing, a planning commission hearing, and then a city council hearing. And I'm thinking we'll be finished by the end of the summer? Hope so. Hopefully. So
Is the draft online now for community members to?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Yes, it is. It's in a PDF format.
Thank you.
And with that,
It's
I'm
under
going to...
both this agenda and the Sustainable Transportation Plan page.
Great, that's just for viewers at home. Thank you very much. Does anybody, well, Diana, you want to finish up the presentation?
Okay, I just want to talk a minute about the relationship between this and the general plan and other things we're doing. There are strategies that are recommended in this draft that are in the general plan and that we're making other efforts on, and then there are some that are new ideas completely. And I'm not going to describe them because Linda's done that. So about transit routes, the general plan calls for frequent transit service, especially east-west, and there's both a Emeryville recommendation and a couple AC transit recommendations that are relevant to that. The another recommendation was to put AC transit information on the Emeryville map. The new map has AC transit stops, but not routes. And the AC Transit F and 88 bus do go to downtown Berkeley. So that's something AC wants us to be aware of when we think we want more service to there. Transit infrastructure, the general plan recommends signal priority and studying the fixed guideway idea and bus-only lanes. And the PED bike plan is looking at bus hub improvements. And the city is doing a grant proposal for a study of a fixed route, something. And the bus-only lane idea is in the parking plan that the council already adopted. In terms of transportation demand management, the general plan calls for car sharing and ride sharing. The TMA says that Zipcar is self-supporting and adding pods now. They don't really want to do much more with it themselves. Cliff Bar is demonstrating bike sharing. They have a bike sharing program for their employees. AC Transit's Easy Pass, where the big organization buys a pass for everybody at a discount, has been used at Avalon and Avenue 64. The general plan calls for parking pricing, flexible parking standards, parking cash out, shared parking and parking permit program, and unbundled parking. The council approved a parking pricing program and they plan to implement it as soon as the economy will bear it. The zoning update committee has agreed to a parking range requirement on both, you could put your parking supply a little bit more or less than the parking requirement, and if you want to go outside that range, then you would need a use permit. Pedestrians, the general plan calls for the bridge over the railroad, which is designed, and over the freeway, which is declared a Caltrans project now. The city has adopted design guidelines, but that's not exactly the same as a street design manual. And staff is exploring the idea of parklets similar to those in San Francisco on the parking lane on some streets. In terms of bicycles, the general plan calls for bicycle parking and for bike streets to be on safe streets for bikes, and dedicated funding for all these kinds of improvements. What's going on is the transit center plan calls for a bike station. The draft Pike Bed plan includes intersection improvements to help bikes and peds and traffic calming. And there's a draft Bike Boulevard memo that does have street selection as part of what it talks about for bike boulevards. And we have a transportation impact fee study going on to help project impact fees to go to all modes. In terms of wayfinding, the general plan calls for our bike signage to be consistent with regional bike numbering system, the green signs, and with the bike boulevard signs, the purple signs in Berkeley. And the general plan calls for bus stop amenities, including information systems and a bunch of other things. And staff is drafting a priority list based on a survey we did this summer of ridership and an inventory of what amenities exist in the stops now. There are some strategies that we aren't already working on and are not in the general plan. Some of them are about Emeryville. One is to coordinate schedules with BART, which I know they've tried to do, but they have a new schedule, so it needs to be done again. One is to post information on the 511.org, which MTC has. They have a page about local shuttles, and Emeryville's not on it. Put AC Transit routes and AC Transit routes and next bus codes that you dial to get when's my bus going to come on the Emeryville map, to expand and update their displays, to update their signs, and the public said signs on all sides of the bus, which they don't have now, and to improve data collection, not just the drivers trying to keep track of who's getting on and off. The topic of parking, the strategy of incentivizing in-lieu fees is not anywhere. Efficient parking permit districts, that means that you issue permits to some workers nearby, but not above the capacity in the daytime when the residents are gone. And this plan suggests to require employers of 10 or more workers to cash out parking. So that's a little more strict than the general plan or the state law. And it could be done by administered through the business license process. In terms of pedestrian facilities, they suggest that we evaluate our ability to maintain or enhance facilities and review our maintenance protocols, and Linda already mentioned the online tool. So we haven't addressed those yet. The pedestrian programs, the festive events, and the educational programs are not in anything we've done so far that I know of. And in terms of bicycles, some of these are design toolbox kit things that could be used when we design specific places on the bike system. Reducing speed limits on bike boulevards, I think, is an interesting idea that we haven't explored yet. And consider barrier-separated bicycle lanes. We brought that up to the bike ped consultants, Alta, and they said, well, there are ways to deal with intersections and driveways. That was the objection before. And there are lots of these. They call them cycle tracks in Europe. And in terms of wayfinding, the recommendation that we have neighborhood walking maps and that we mark gateways and work with other cities to make sure that bikeway signs continue across the borders are new ideas. And we can build images of retail centers using landscaping, lighting, and public art. So those are all kind of new from this plan.
Diana, to clarify, the first items that you were talking about were sort of items that we already cover in some of our additional items that we cover in the general plan and other
There are items
documents
that are in this plan that are already
that are in this
sort
plan
of addressed.
that are addressed. So crossover.
Mm-hmm.
And then the last
These
of
are
ideas
ideas
were
that are in this plan that are not already being looked at.
but they are in
now.
this plan.
Right. Mm-hmm. And you also have a letter from AC Transit, which we got today. First, they complimented us on doing a multimodal plan. That idea came out of the stakeholder interviews. And they say we need to concentrate on maintaining our transit service, which is a big thing these days, and then enhance it. And that we should think about, since we have so many employees that drive, what do they need? Do they need local service, rapid service, intercity service? Where are they coming from? Where are they going? Do they need bus service or do they need rail service? Which one would really address their needs best? And how can we get the employers to buy easy passes for their employees? And they agree with the plan's suggestion that we require easy pass in new development. And they suggest that we eliminate parking minimums, as some cities do. And that our street design manual integrate the AC Transit Street Design Manual and the Congress for New Urbanism Street Design Manual. And then number 7 is about where we suggest a couple of where Nelson Nygaard suggests a couple of route extensions in AC Transit system. There was a route coming down 40th to San Pablo that used to extend west, and people missed that. But they're saying it duplicates the Emeryville, so we should work on making it easier to transfer to Emeryville to go west. And that we should let people know about the buses they do have to downtown Berkeley instead of putting one on Edline. And we have worked with AC Transit on the design of Powell near Christie, so we can get an F-bus stop there, and we need to work on them some more to refine that. And last but probably most important, we need to coordinate marketing with AC Transit and MTC, including AC Transit did a study at San Pablo 40th about ways to make it easier for riders to find their bus, including well-marked bus shelters and kiosks and things like that. And they said, well, why doesn't the city do their own transit map and put AC Transit and Emery Go Round and BART on that? So that concludes our presentation, and we would be glad to answer any questions.
Thank you, Diana. This isn't a public hearing, but just in case there's somebody out there that really feels dead set on saying something, I'll go ahead and open it up for public hearing. Anyone out there want to speak on this item? Seeing none, let's bring it back to the commission. I think we'll probably have a host of comments, and maybe you can make notes, because I think everyone here is very passionate about this sort of a plan and enhancing especially bike and pedestrian and safety, that kind of stuff. So we can go around. We could start with John, who's probably
I've got pages and pages.
the
of,
Lorax.
Do we want to start with the questions first? And I really
Sure. Let's go through some questions.
One question that I had was, we have design guidelines.
You can come right up to this, because I think most of the questions are going to be for you.
So we have design guidelines that talk about our sidewalks, some really great stuff. I'm not really clear on what the difference between those design guidelines are and what the street design guidelines would be. Is there an overlap there? Do the street design guidelines talk about sidewalks? And
There would be some overlap, but the manual that we're talking about would go into more depth and look at all kinds of streets and sidewalks, pedestrian walkways. It would just be a more comprehensive manual, but there definitely is some overlap.
okay, and then that also ties in the complete streets, and would really embrace that and incorporate that.
Yeah, oh, definitely. That's the whole idea behind it. It would be a complete streets manual for Emeryville.
Okay. That's all my questions.
Any more questions?
I had a question. I noticed that the AC Transit comments it says the plan should focus on needs rather than on modes. And I was wondering, I raised this question a year ago and several times in the past. Have you or any other people did an origin destination study so we know where people want to go rather than planning routes without that basic knowledge? For example, there's a lot of talk about everybody coming on the trains, but where are they going when they get here? That seems to be important. Are they going to Berkeley? Are they going to San Francisco? Are they going to Emeryville? It seems to me that's rather important information to know when you're planning your transit.
First of all, to the direct answer to your question, we did not do a specific origin destination study, but what we do have available to us, and we did include and look at as part of this plan development, was census data. Workers, different travel markets, commuters going to and from work, recreational users, weekend users, where they're coming from and where they're going and what their current modes are.
The census tells you that?
The census gives journey to work data, yes. And so we did include that. In fact, there is early on in the plan, I think it's in the first chapter, we have a chart in there that shows different travel markets and what percentages of people are currently driving, taking transit, or whatever mode they're using. So we did rely on that information.
Any more questions?
I had a quick question. You mentioned Hollis bus only. Could you elaborate a little bit on
What that
your
means?
intention was? Yeah.
As a major corridor, it during peak periods, particularly when the Emery go-round is traveling on Hollis Street, it gets backed up with traffic delays, traffic congestion, queuing up, doesn't always make it through the intersection the first time. A bus-only lane would give it a signal prioritization so that the bus wouldn't be stopped in traffic but would able to continue while the traffic was stopped. The bus could continue to go through.
Okay, thank you.
Would that be sort of a no parking 4 to 6 p.m. kind of thing, or because there is a pretty limited curb-to-curb width in that street?
I believe it would require no parking along that strip. I'm going to look
When
to
we were
Diana's.
working on the parking plan, we were thinking in terms of a peak hour prohibition.
How would the bus get through if there's just a two-lane street? I don't follow that. How do you
They-
give priority to a
Walking
bus?
areas.
If they remove the parking area during peak
Lane.
times, then there's an extra
There
lane.
is an extra lane in both directions?
It would be.
Would provide an extra lane that would be the bus-only lane.
Okay.
One of the illustrations in the new general plan, those computer simulations of what the city might look like in the future, is on Hollis Street, and shows the new park in that area. It also shows one possible configuration for bus-only lanes.
Yeah, those cross-section drawings that they show.
At current time, though, the
Yeah,
Hollis
no.
bus runs, and I've ridden on it, only runs every 15 minutes, even during the rush hour. Now, that's clearing a lot of cars out for one bus every 15 minutes. It's not as if there's a whole line of buses like you see in San Francisco waiting to pick people up. We just don't have that kind of traffic.
Well, we might want to increase the headways on the Emeryville. I mean, I've ridden the Hollis bus myself during peak hour, and it can be pretty crowded.
Yeah, that route is often standing room only during peak hour. I mean, ideally, if funds were available, you'd want to increase that frequency. It could easily handle increasing it by 50%, a bus every 7.5 minutes, and it would, it would still be every seat full, given the loads that are there now, and especially in the future, as gas prices move towards $5 a gallon.
Can you tell me the reasons for not looking further at the West Oakland BART station, which has more frequency of trains going to the city and it has different routes than MacArthur?
We looked at that, and we concluded that once you're on BART, it gives you more, the quickest route is to the MacArthur BART station. And it's, while there's parking, there's other things at the West Oakland BART station. People much prefer the MacArthur BART station. There's more, you can go in more directions. It's a shorter bus ride. People much prefer to be on the bus a shorter time and BART a longer time. And we think it's just best to have the quickest, the shortest bus ride between Emeryville and MacArthur. We did recommend some improvements at the MacArthur BART station. It gets pretty congested if you see it at peak hour with the shuttle buses and traffic and taxis that generally are outside. One of our recommendations is to work closely with BART in trying to improve the circulation to get buses and pedestrians, bicycles, everything moving better at the MacArthur BART station.
Well, maybe if that development ever gets going on that parking lot, the Transit Village will clear that up. Any more questions?
One quick question. Does your draft consider preferential parking for sustainable electric vehicles with recharge stations that I see proliferating in other cities?
No, we did not address that in this plan.
Is it something you want to consider?
We certainly could,
Okay.
yeah.
My one other question was, could you go in a little bit to why you would want to lower the parking in lieu fees?
The parking in lieu fees right now, it's about $7,300. My understanding is, and I'm probably going to turn to Diana for a little help here, is it is very rarely used. And one of the reasons it's rarely used is that many developers go, instead of providing all the parking or paying the in lieu fee, they're opting for a variance. And it would be much better if there was an in lieu fee that was a little lower in price, so that it makes it a little more attractive, and the funds that are collected for the in lieu fee be used to improve other modes of transportation. So it's sort of a combination of a recommendation about the in lieu fees. Where they're priced now is sort of at the upper end. If you look at some other cities, if they were slightly lower, I think it would be utilized more.
From the chart, it looked like we were sort of on the
Well,
medium
there was
low
one
end.
city, I forget which one city that it was almost twice as much as yours, but the rest were in the $4,000 to $5,000 range.
I would agree with that. Any more questions? I know the AC Transit memo came in this afternoon.
Unfortunately, I've not had a chance to see it
Okay, yeah,
yet.
so there does seem to be some good ideas there, and certainly AC Transit's a big player in this, so.
And I should also say that during the development of this plan, we did work with AC Transit throughout the entire process, also with BART as well. And of course, staff from Emeryville TMA were very closely involved.
Thank you. And now we'll kind of go into comments and suggestions for the plan. So go in order again. Go ahead, John.
Okay. First, I want to say thanks for a very thorough and complete report that you put together. It's very encouraging to me to see that there are solutions, and they're workable solutions. That was pretty impressive, and I really loved your first graphic that shows where we're at today and where we can be in the future, and that you actually have put together a plan that we can achieve that goal. Also wanted to mention the significance of the plan as far as the name change to sustainable transportation. I think that's really important. And it's sustainable in many ways, not just with climate change, but also our economic sustainability. Because if we look to our future, it's not going to be the city that has the best freeway access. That's going to be the most economic, vibrant city. It's going to be the city that has the best transportation. So I think that's really very important. So the report has a lot of information, and a recommendation that I would have is, and I noticed when I was going through this that this is called the draft final report. I would almost recommend that this document as it stands today be considered a final report, and excuse me, something that is really a report that says these are the findings of all the research that we've done. I find it a little cumbersome as a plan, and I think there's a lot of redundant statements in here, and there's a lot to me it was a little bit confusing to go through, and I didn't know exactly where it was, and there's a lot of background information, which is really great in this report, and it was really helpful for me to see this is why we're doing the things that we're doing. This is how it came about. But I think for a plan, I'd like to see the plan be a separate document and this be kind of the supporting how we got there and make the plan a lot less cumbersome and straightforward. And then also in the plan, we've got a bunch of different plans going on right now. And before I forget, one of the things is connecting to a website, and this is kind of a general statement. I went to a community meeting a couple weeks ago, and we talked about how the community can be more informed about things. And there's a lot of information on our city website, but it's kind of in different places. And there are a lot of very interrelated plans, as Diana pointed out, with a general plan and the bike pedestrian plan and all these things. Excuse me. And it might be helpful on the city website if we had maybe a tab that is current plans, and because there's some really good stuff, and I think they're all kind of related, and they would be helpful for the citizens to be able to go to one quick place and say, oh, here's our vision for the future, and here, starting with a general plan, very general vision, here's our bike plan, here's our parking plan, here's our transportation plan. So kind of grouping that so it's a little bit more accessible on the website. Then going back to the actual plan itself, because we do have a parking plan and we do have a pedestrian bike plan, I think there's overlap, and I think as AC Transit kind of said, it's really great that this is multimodal. I'm concerned that there's overlap there and confusion if we have two different plans describing strategies for bicycles and pedestrians, what takes precedence. And so what I'd prefer to see is if we had like a 1 or 2 page statement of here are these 6 key things, and then kind of a summary statement or page about each one of them, and then direct people for more information, go to the bike pedestrian plan. And then the other part of that is to make sure that the great strategies that you've come up with also get included in those other plans. And one of the things that really struck me with reading through the parking in here is it really gives some good rationale for why would we want to do this and the benefits that it can bring. And I think when you talk about parking, especially parking, that's pretty hot with a lot of people. Don't mess with my parking. But so if we can incorporate those in the parking, that would be great. So then if we broke it down and really focused on what I think are some of the key issues that we could really focus on in this plan, and that's the transit, the transportation demand management, and the wayfinding. Going through my notes here, I think it's also important that we make a tie into the climate action plan. And one of the things that we might consider, and I don't know if this is practical or not, and maybe something to think about though, is do we have any goals set for vehicles mild traveled reduction, VMT reductions? And is that something that we should consider? And if we do consider it, how do you measure before and after? And but I think we're in the process of writing a grant application right now for transportation. And one of the things that I see that can support is all these different documents can really support us in getting our grants. And kind of having an outline of goals for VMT reduction, and here are strategies how to get there, I think could really help us in getting grants in the future. So we talked about the street design guidelines. So as far as the focusing on transit, what I'd like to see a major focus on, and it's already there, but I'd like to see more of a focus, is on the Transbay connections for AC Transit and AC Transit's connections to downtown Berkeley. And then kind of a big one is, in general terms, improving the Emeryville quality of service. And when I read through the report, it was a little conflicting. And one of the things that I read was everybody loves the Emeryville, and I think that's a really true statement. And nobody really says anything bad about the Emeryville, and it's not really bad, or it's more like critical of what could we do better. So it says that in one place, but then there are like probably 6 or 7 really key statements that talk about the service issues that Emeryville has, getting stuck in traffic, getting into the BART station, and things like that. So I think what didn't come across maybe in when we talk to people about the Emeryville is, like me, I think everybody loves the Emeryville. It's free transit and it gets them where they want to go. So they're not going to be critical of it, but I think we have to look at maybe analyzing it a little bit more, being more critical of what are the gaps, how can we improve the service? And in very general terms, putting a big focus on how can we improve the quality of service of the Emeryville. And that might be as simple as providing better wayfinding at the BART station, having assigned spots for particular bus routes so it's not confusing, having better bus stops, all the way to the quantum leap would be going to the streetcar, and which is a very long-term vision. But the other thing that I saw in here is kind of, there's the Emeryville and then there's a streetcar. And really what I'm envisioning for the streetcar is really that is the next level, the next generation of the Emeryville. So tying those two more together of here's where we're at today, what are the incremental steps that we can do to improve the Emeryville service, and maybe ultimately that leads us to a streetcar. So one of the things that I also saw that was missing is that all transit should be accessible. And I didn't really get a really good sense of, we really want to make all our transit accessible.
Accessible, excuse me, you're referring to ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act, accessible?
Yeah, for people with limited mobility and across the board, really. So our aging population, we talk about the aging population and the demographics, which I think was a really key point in the report. but I don't think we did a good enough job of incorporating that into the strategies, that whatever our transit is, from the Emeryville to AC Transit, it should be accessible from people from 8 to 80 and should be usable. It should also be accessible for people in wheelchairs and mobility devices, people that have strollers, people that are going to the airport and have bags, people that are grocery shopping. So accessibility for all those forms, and I don't think that that really came across in the strategies. Kind of a word about the Easy Pass. I think that's a great idea, but for Easy Pass to work, I think AC Transit has to go to the places that we want to go to, and that kind of ties into one of the questions that Art had, is where is it that we want to go to? Now, to me, I think the Emeryville takes us to the BART station, which gives us great connections to Oakland, pretty much anywhere on the BART system. The things that it doesn't provide are the Transbay connection to San Francisco, and that was another thing that your study really pointed out, that the large number of people that are going to San Francisco. So again, going back to putting more focus on that, and then I think downtown Berkeley is another area connecting to the Cal campus. Even though there's the 88 bus route, which I don't even know where it goes to, but when we look at the highest density areas where the highest residential is, we've got the F Transbay bus, but because it's a Transbay bus, even if it's going towards Berkeley, you pay $4, and a lot of people aren't going to pay a $4 fare to go to Berkeley. So I think the Easy Pass is a really great thing, and I really like the idea of TDM measure when we have new housing projects that have a lot of housing, new projects in general that have a lot of people associated with them. I think it's a great strategy for that. Another thing that didn't come across, and this is something I see in general, is the Capital Corridor. I think it's really underutilized, and I think, and it kind of came through in here how we describe the Capital Corridor, is like we talk about it going from San Jose to Sacramento, and yeah, those are the endpoints, but maybe what's more important are the close connections, that it goes to Hayward, that it goes to Jack London Square, that it goes to 4th Street in Berkeley. And I think it's something that has a great potential for ridership, but I think we have to do a few things. First of all, we have to know more about it. We have to let people know that this is a commuter train. We have to talk about it as a commuter train. And then we have to get by some of the limitations that it has. Like, I like to go to the Jack London Square to the farmer's market. And one day I decided, let's take the train down there because it's one stop. It's really convenient for me. I can walk across the street. It takes me exactly where I want to go. But $28 later for two people, it's like, I'm not going to do this again. But yet...
And waiting for the return train, you're not going to do it again.
And really that's okay because it runs, on a schedule and it stays on a schedule. And if I'm going to Jack London Square, and especially like to the farmer's market, as long as I know that I'm going to be there for 2 hours or 1 hour, that's great. But I'm not going to pay that fare again. And I think there's some things that we can do, maybe if we work on some sort of negotiated one-stop fare out of Emeryville. And I think what that'll do is it'll provide transit to these locations, but it also gets people familiar with what the Capital Corridor is. And I think once people see it, it's like, oh, this is really a great transportation source that isn't utilized. And kind of on that same vein is the transit center and the Transbay buses that Amtrak runs. And they're mentioned in here that you can't just get on a bus and go from the transit center to San Francisco. And I think that's one of the strategies that we have to look at. And maybe if we can alternate, because they run very frequently, but if we can alternate the AC Transit Transbay bus service and coordinate it so it's running in the off times when Amtrak's buses aren't running, we could have some really great service utilizing the same vehicles that we have today. So just kind of being a little bit more creative on how we approach things. and then also utilizing the transit center itself. One of the things that AC Transit said in their report is we're looking at better Transbay bus service, but we just don't know where to put it and where we're going to stop. And to me, it really makes a lot of sense. We've got a transit center. Let's connect it to our transit center and better utilize that. And my last point is the success of the casual carpools. I recently had the opportunity to work on some projects in San Francisco where I'm taking the casual carpool, and it works out extremely well. I catch it in front of Pacific Park Plaza. One of the things that we could do better there is consolidate. There's becoming a transit node in front of Avenue 64 on Christie. And so we have Transbay buses that are stopping there, but our casual carpool is further up the street, kind of mid-block, kind of south of Pacific Park Plaza. And I think we could have great synergy if we could consolidate those all at the Avenue 64 location for a couple of reasons. One, there's going to be a coffee shop there. And I think riders tend to, like I will tend to take the first available form of transit. If the Transbay bus is coming, I'll take the Transbay bus. If the Emeryville is coming, I'll take the Emeryville.
And that's why casual carpool sites are near transit bus stops, because it is a backup, exactly as you say.
So if we could just consolidate that. So that's the last of my many comments.
Okay. Well, I just want to say thank you. For someone who I know has worked on this report very closely with Diana for a long time, it really warms my heart to know that someone read it in such detail. So I thank you. I thank you. And it's something you said at the beginning I also really just want to comment on, and I know we don't want to spend that much more time on this item, but I really want to emphasize, I think, a point you made early on, that you like the fact that this is called a sustainable transportation plan, because when we started this back 3 years ago with around planning office with Charlie and Diana, it was called the Alternative Transportation Plan, and somewhere maybe a year into the process, we realized these are not alternative transportation modes. These are just one of many transportation modes that people need to consider. There's nothing alternative about it, but they are sustainable. So I think that is important, and I just wanted to say thank you for reading it in such detail. These are very good comments.
Thank you, John. Buzz?
I was one of the, quote, stakeholders, unquote, that was interviewed, and I must have given the wrong answer because no one ever got back to me again, which I was told they would. My general feeling is that it's biased against cars. Now, I ride my bicycle every day, and I use the Emery-go-round several times a week, but automobiles are still a basic requirement, and I think the whole thrust of this has been we got to get rid of cars, and I think that's a problem for Emeryville.
Thank you, Buzz. Gail?
I want to thank you for all the good ideas that are in here, especially useful for us, I think, are the TDM ideas, because that's an issue that we deal with when we see new developments, and we can have input on that. I think it really is important, one of the things that John was talking about, having integrated plans, and I hope you are going to be integrating Diana's material and information into the overall plan, and not just what we have in the general plan, but how these different plans do interrelate to one another, so that there's some way that we can tie things together within this document. I also think that it really is important what Art raised to at least make strong recommendations for some kind of origin destination study, because we do have good public transit with the Emery-go-round, much better than many, many places. And because we are an employment center, we have a high concentration of people here. The problem is not getting people from 64th Street to 62nd Street. The problem is getting people from Antioch to Emeryville. And the only way that we're going to understand how to prioritize getting the best use out of the different transit systems and how to negotiate with them and how to try to strategize about improving transit between systems is if we really have a better understanding of where people need to get to and where they're coming from. So I'd like to see that as a little bit stronger portion of the report. And that's also backed up, I think, by Nathan Landau's letter from AC Transit saying that the plan should focus on needs rather than modes. And it really goes back to understanding where are we trying to get from and where are we trying to get to, so that we can really continue to strategize and evolve the strategies about how to pull that off. But I do think that you've got a lot of great ideas in here.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Gail. Art?
Well, and to follow up my previous question, in response to my asking you about origin destination, you said the census data. What does the census data tells you that would help us out? I didn't follow the answer to my question.
What the census data provides journey to work information.
Which means?
Where people live, where they're coming from, and where they're going to work, and how they're getting there. It's not a detailed origin destination. It's not going to give it's not going to give, cross streets if that's the level of detail, but it does give you a sense of.
Is it only from home to work, just those two things?
It's journey to work and other trips as well.
Excuse me, I worked as a census collector, and that was not a question that we asked people.
This information is from the 2000 census.
It's not the 2010, it's the 2000 census data.
Because I can't believe that would be very useful as opposed to what I'm suggesting, to find out where people want to go. Because someone may be coming from Sacramento, so the census data is going to say someone who comes from Sacramento, taking the Capitol Corridor, wants to go to Jack London Square. I don't think so.
No, it's not that level of detail. No, it's not.
And that's what we need. Because if I agree with Emeryville, if Emeryville doesn't go where people want us to go, like for instance, I like to go to the UC campus. I don't know how to get there, except with my car. And that's the type of thing we need to know more about.
Right, but I should say that if you did want to take public transportation from your home in Emeryville to UC, what you could do today is you could go to the 511 website. There's a trip planner, and if you say you want transit,
Yeah,
it
and
would.
you have to go to BART station and then get on a bus that goes back to Perk. So you're backtracking to get to where you want to go. It doesn't make any sense.
It may not be the best route. I mean, it may not be the quickest route. Absolutely not. That's true.
Well, the census data, while it might not work for the specifics you're looking for, it certainly helps on a general level for a city this big. We're talking about 10,000 residents.
If we're going to have a pragmatic, useful plan, I think we need more detail.
Agreed. And if you look at the statistics, 70-80% of the folks that are in their cars by themselves are coming to work and going to and from work. I mean, a lot of that orientation data could just come from the large companies, just the Pixars and the Chirons and that and so forth. You had a comment?
One of the strategies that we often use, and we did not do that for this plan, but one of the things that you can use, you're absolutely correct, is you look at your largest employers and do a zip code analysis. If the employers are willing to give you residential addresses of their employees, you then can look at where people are coming from and if they're coming into Emeryville. That does require a significant amount of work. It takes a lot of resources that we didn't quite honestly have for this study.
People riding the Emery-go-round might be more apt to filling out these sorts of surveys because they are riding for free.
Right. You can also, that's certainly another way to get at this information, is to survey your existing riders, and you can find that information out. But then again, what you're looking at transit riders today, and I think what you're referring to is something much larger, not just looking at existing riders, but a much broader population.
Well, if we're going to have more than a general plan of where we think things go rather than an actual plan, an actionable plan, I think you have to know where people want to go. And I think that's important.
Thank you, Art.
Chair Flores.
Yes.
May I just make a couple of comments?
Absolutely, Charlie.
Well, as we indicated, this journey to work data is only from the 2000 census. It's what they refer to as sample data. It's the data that these are the questions that were asked of, like, 1/8 of the households, as opposed to every single household. In 2010, the Census Bureau did away with the sample data, so we're not going to get that information in 2010. There is an alternative called the American Community Survey that the census does. I'm not sure, I haven't looked at their Journey to Work data. I'm not sure what they've got. I would say, though, that the 2000 census data, Journey to Work, is down to the census tract level. So you can find out who's going from every single census tract to every other census tract in the Bay Area, which is a heck of a lot of information, and by what mode they're going and all that kind of thing. Frankly, that's kind of information overload. And I'm not sure that there's comparable data available right now, but whether there is or not, this project is basically done. I mean, we've pretty much used up most of the budget for this project, so we don't have the ability to go out at this point and do extensive origin, destination, or other kinds of analysis. The scope of work that Nelson Nygaard had did spell out, a fairly comprehensive program, including stakeholder interviews and community workshops and talking to AC Transit and BART and so forth, and getting the data that they had available. And that was how, with these various means of getting input, that was how they got the information they needed to put this plan together. But, without a new budget and a new study, we're not going to be able to do the level of detail that you're asking for at this point.
I was seeing an origin destination study as a recommendation of this plan to do in the future, because I think that it applies not only to Emeryville, but it has to do a lot with the just interregional transportation. I don't think that it needs to be part of this study. I think that what you've done is plenty for this study, but I think that it should be a recommendation as a manner to better understand how the services can interact better so that they can serve people that are coming and going from Emeryville.
That is certainly feasible.
And I think AC Transit with Emery Go Round could do that. But thank you. Stephen?
Yeah, I do appreciate your hard work, and I'm in great favor of parking maximums, and I've seen it work very effectively in other cities. And I'd like you to focus a little bit on sustainable vehicle parking areas that will get preferential treatment with
Electric
recharging.
vehicle and charging stations?
Yeah, we're going to see that, I think, proliferate as gas goes up, as you mentioned, to $5 a gallon. Connectivity, I think, is really important from both the pedestrian and bicycle point of view. If we're going to make this a truly pedestrian, bicycle-friendly city, connectivity to the peninsula and back and forth and over the tracks and throughout the 1.2 square mile city needs to be improved. And I know you've worked on that quite a bit. Activating areas that are major thoroughfares for pedestrians and areas to get over tracks, the Powell Street overpass, the area below it. I mean, there's some things that we really need to focus on to make it a much more pleasant experience so people will walk and bike. I like the idea of pedestrian only. I'd love to see the Doyle Street Park become active pedestrian only and have the farmers market there on Thursdays or Saturdays or Sundays and make that a whole wellness model for the residents and community around it as a place not just for people to gather. It's a very sustainable park, but also to energize it with medical fairs, wellness fairs, and also those public marketplaces. I'd love to see that as a farmer's market location. I think the reason they located it here was for parking. So if we're going to say parking's not an issue, we can put it more central in our city and maybe even encourage more participation from some of the farmers surrounding the area if we put it in a nice, sustainable park milieu, so to speak.
Can I ask what you meant by pedestrian only?
Closing some of the streets surrounding the park.
Closing streets, oh,
On
okay.
certain days,
Like
certain
the street
times.
next to the park.
Yes, make it only pedestrian. Don't even care about
And you're
parking.
specifically Doyle Park and consider moving the farmer's
I'd
market?
love that,
So that it's a
It would
pedestrian-only
energize that area.
activity.
Yeah, I think that would be great. Great use for that park.
Okay.
And what are we doing about the food trucks? I know that's a whole nother issue. I'm sorry to bring that up.
When legal
Here he
wants to
goes.
speak up, we know we got something going on.
The staff will be introducing an ordinance to the city council at the next city council meeting on the 5th that will address the regulation of food trucks. So
Okay.
that'll be the first reading on the
Part
April
of transportation, that's why I mentioned it, but Thank you for your hard work.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Stephen. Vanessa.
I wanted to add my appreciation of the thoroughness of this document, and it was chock full of great information. Although I must say that John did have a point about making sure that the action areas are clear, well-defined, and right up front. Also, I think most people went over things, but I second John's also that there should be certain ways that folks can get the information, and it's very accessible, and the interrelationship between the cities. So on the city website, that maps are one entire area of the you can just click on it and go to the maps, and that they interrelate, and that when we're working on our plans, that they also interrelate, because there are all the different transportation plans, and the bicycle and pedestrian plans need to make sure that they're all working together. There's just a simple thing that I've been noticing in San Francisco on Fell Street, where they have striped color the bike lanes, for instance. It is working wonderfully. Everybody's sharing, but it's just the simplest thing, and I've noticed a great deal more bicyclists in the city using that and feeling a little more comfortable. And I also thought the transit connection with Amtrak and Transbay buses to San Francisco does need to be really nailed down. It's kind of nebulous at this point where it needs to be. Certainly the intersection of Powell Street is one stop that needs to be considered, and of course as close as possible to Amtrak as well. And just getting that connection across the bay more accessible to the folks that are on the Capitol Corridor seems important. And I think you did a great job, so thank you.
Thank you. I just wanted to say one other thing, in that the comments that many of you made about the plan being too voluminous, hard to find. I should just say that right before the meeting, Diana and I spoke about that we're talking about doing something very closely aligned to what you recommended, that the whole first part of it gives lots of background and documentation that could be a separate report, and just focus just on the issues that we're recommending for our strategies, and have maybe a separate, maybe call it technical document or something else. So thank you for those. Those are very good recommendations, and we will follow up on all of this.
I just want to also say that I thought there were many of your recommendations were doable right away at low cost, and it was exciting to get that. So thank you.
Good, thank you.
So yeah, great report. Yeah, pretty lengthy, pretty redundant. There's a lot of information, but I agree with everyone that it's a lot of important information. It's just a matter of making it readable, usable. Some great ideas here, so I won't piggyback them. I did want to mention that I want to make sure. I also read the report. I did not read the appendices, so I bet you John did. Just to key in on seniors, especially on the east side of San Pablo, where our two senior complexes are. There's always talk about the freeway, Powell, Christie, main artery roads, but San Pablo is quite a freeway in itself. 4 lanes, which can be, even though it's only 35 miles an hour, you're hard pressed to find somebody going 35 miles an hour on the road, especially during rush hour. Our seniors, the only way to go to shop is west, and they have to cross that street. I think I'm the only one here in the Triangle neighborhood, so I try to champion a little bit safety across that street, not only for the seniors, but for the high school is on that road. Ani Yates is on that road almost, and so there's a lot of crossing there. And I think if there was better safety across San Pablo, we might have less vehicle trips, because kids might walk to school, seniors might walk to shop. Of course, services and everything need to be increased as well. There's no talk of universal size parking, and I know there's maybe not too many studies out there, but I know as a developer, and my company, we've looked at universal size parking in some of our developments, actually got a variance for one, and it seems to work. It's something to look at. It can reduce the amount of parking spaces you have, and it's just another trick to kind of getting there. Not too many mentioned of the Bay Trail on the wayfinding. I think the Bay Trail is very, very obviously important, as any coastal city gets the Bay Trail. I was in Hercules the other day and I found the Bay Trail out there. Beautiful wayfinding and really good navigating to get on and around the Bay Trail. I rode my bike up there. Emeryville is still not there because we have to come inland to go down the Bay Trail. We have to skip the Crescent Bay there, but just to include the Bay Trail. Encouraging developers by offering bonuses, density bonuses, and taking away parking, and other ways of encouraging developers to look at parking differently is a good idea. As we get back into development, let's hope. And let's see, I had a couple more comments. I know it's almost bedtime for some of our viewers. Emery go round into the residential neighborhoods, and it's pointed out about 20 times in there, but as we increase in size and we get more renters who are commuting, I think Emery go round does need to make its way on all the perimeters of the city, including the Hollis Doyle neighborhood and certainly the Triangle neighborhood. So thank you very much. It's a great report, and we'll see how it comes back after the study session at City Council.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, as I mentioned, we've got a lot of folks here for the next agenda item. Public hearing, Escuela Bilingue Internacional. Rue Desai will be making the presentation. I want to commend everybody here for being so patient on that item. That was an hour and a half. We didn't expect it to go that long, but as you can see, we're very passionate about this transportation sustainability. So thank you to everybody, especially the kids, for being patient and quiet.
Good evening, Commissioners. This is a use permit to establish a school at 47th and 45th on San Pablo. The school will establish in an existing two-story building, as you can see on the map. The entire site is a little over 75,000 square feet, and the building is 28,000 square feet. The existing parking area accommodates about 155 parking spaces. The building is currently being used by two other tenants. One is the Social Vocational Services, which occupy a portion of the first floor, and then Living Hope Christian Center, which occupies the second floor. These are the existing pictures of the building, San Pablo looking north and 47th Street also looking north. And this is the east elevation of the building and the parking lot. This is the proposed site plan. So as I mentioned, the use permit is to establish a school that includes pre-kindergarten to grade 8 classes. The proposal includes very few site improvements, and these are 7,500 square feet of play area, some reconfiguration of the parking spaces so that they are reduced to about 125 spaces, and also a 20-foot pedestrian pathway along the eastern property line, which would include an asphalt walkway between two green belts. Also, 8-foot fence along the western length is also being proposed. Some landscaping is also included. There's one street tree, some shrubbery at this corner, some few more trees within the parking lot, as well as there are some raised garden beds, and I believe there is a few benches as well. In terms of circulation, what is being proposed is that the drop-off would occur, the students would come along 45th Street from San Pablo, enter through here, the drop-off would occur somewhere here, and then they would exit on 47th Street and then go back to San Pablo Avenue. There is a phasing involved. As I mentioned, there are existing 2 tenants that occupy the building, and as the leases expire, the school will establish and occupy the whole building. In phase 1, the school will occupy a portion of the first floor, about 7,000 square feet. During the phase 1, there would be site improvements that I just mentioned, and regarding the pathway during this phase, the applicant will be required only to dedicate an easement for the pathway. And this is expected to occur in fall of this year. In phase 2, the school will occupy the whole of first floor, that's about 14,000 square feet, and this will occur in fall 2012. In phase 3, the school will occupy the entire building, both the first floor and the second floor. They will also construct the pathway before they are allowed to occupy the whole building. And this is expected to occur between fall of 2014 and 2017. Some of the operating characteristics. EBI is an independent coeducational day school that offers Spanish and English dual language program extending from pre-K through 8th grade. The applicant is going to be talking a little bit more about the school, so I'm just going to restrict myself to that. They are expected to operate during normal business hours between 7 a.m. and 6 p.m. 5 days a week. This is the different phases and the number of students and faculty that are expected to occur between phase 1, 2, and 3. In terms of conformity to zoning standards, the proposed use falls in 2 use categories: the daycare services, which would mean pre-K, pre-kindergarten classes, and community education, which would be the elementary school. These 2 uses are permitted with a conditional use permit in both the mixed-use residential zone and the medium-density residential zone. The site falls under the 2 zones. The area along San Pablo is MUR, and the area along the east side is RM. The floor area and height, no changes are proposed in the building, and so FAR and the height are a non-issue, but the building itself does comply with the current FAR and the height requirements on this site. In terms of parking, the parking requirements will need to accommodate the existing uses in phase 1 and phase 2, and then of course the proposed use of the school. The Living Hope Christian Center, this was, if you recall, a plan, the commission approved a use permit in September of 2008, and 46 spaces was the requirement for that use permit. For the social vocational services, that's considered an office use, and we have the requirement of 1 per 333 square feet, and this translates to 28 spaces. Now, the parking, the way we have done the calculation is there are a couple of things. The parking requirements for the daycare services and for community education are different. The daycare services have a more intensive parking requirement. Also, the other issue is the division of the school between pre-K and the elementary school. This will really depend on community demand. So at this point, we do not have precise breakdown of the floor area for daycare and for community education. So what we've done is we've kind of taken the worst case scenario. So what we have these numbers are the base case. The base case assumes that the entire building is occupied by community education. And then the alternative assumes that at least 5,000 square feet of daycare services, 5,000 square feet of the building fall under daycare services, which is the maximum, and will accommodate the worst case scenario. So after doing the calculations during normal business hours, during phase 1, 38 is what is required. Phase 2, it'll be 14, and in phase 3, it'll be 23. Keep in mind that the Living Hope Christian Center, their requirement of 46 spaces occur during non-business hours. That's during weekends and in the evenings. So that is a requirement. This requirement here is during non-business hours. So what we've done in conditions of approval is that we have required them to provide at least the 38, 14, and 23, which is the worst case scenario for during normal business hours, and then these spaces which occur during non-business hours. I hope that's confusing enough. There are, on your desk, there is a memo from me, and this is modification to the conditions of approval. Essentially, the first two are clarifications regarding the pedestrian easement, and what is underlined is the new language that is being proposed. And essentially, the first condition on your screen clarifies that the applicant is responsible for the ongoing maintenance of the path. The other condition on your screen clarifies about the fence. They had proposed a chain link fence, which staff did not like, and so we've changed that to some other material, and making sure that whatever that fence is, it allows for visibility along the walkway. At this point, the applicant has not prepared a plan for the pathway, as this will occur down the road. Eventually, they will provide a plan, and that would be subject to approval by the planning director, and that is in the condition of approval as well. The last condition that is modified is that in the plans that were submitted, there was one sheet for the floor plans for phase 1 that was not included, and so that's what this condition does. It includes that sheet. Our recommendation is approving this use permit and subject to the conditions of approval. I just wanted to clarify one thing, that in the agenda, I believe there was a typo regarding that this would also include a design review. There is no design review. This is only a use permit, as they're not proposing any changes or modifications to the building that require a building permit. If there are questions, I'll be happy to answer. The applicant is here with a presentation for you.
I'd also just like to point out that we received a number of emails about this in the last couple of days, most of them today, most of them this afternoon. I forwarded them to all of you. I don't know if you've had a chance to check your email, but if you haven't, they're all also printed out for you on the dais.
Thank you. We do have them all. Thank you, Maru. Questions?
I have one question. The new condition that's there regarding the path, it's the school would be responsible for maintaining and providing power for lighting on the path, but the city would be constructing the path?
No, the applicant will be constructing the path.
Okay.
And that path will be, that's in another...
I know it's a future phase, but it was unclear, so...
Question. I had a question concerning the path as well. There's 31 parking spaces there currently. So when that path is constructed, there's 31 less parking spaces.
Correct.
How does that impact the use and appropriate parking requirements?
I used 125, which assumes that the path is constructed. So in the calculations that we did, I took away the parking spaces that would be lost as a result of the path.
Okay.
And maybe we should clarify about the parking. The existing parking lot has way more parking than they need, either now or any time in the future. So as Miru said, I guess there's 150 now, and if you take away the ones that would be in the way of the path, that leaves about 125, I guess. The maximum they need at any time is 46. That's for the church, when the church is in session on weekends or evenings. When the church goes away, the maximum they need at any one time is 38. So they have plenty of parking, and as the plans indicate, they're planning on doing what they have at their current location, which is the parking lot doubles as a playground, and they can have, basketball and things like that on the parking spaces that they're not using for parking.
What was the city's requirement of this path? Why did that?
Where does this come from? Yeah, that's a very good question.
It comes from the general plan.
Oh.
The general plan shows a mid-block pedestrian path at this location.
Oh.
And it was in that condo project that was there originally. It kind of went right through the development, actually.
Yeah, and actually that was required before it was in the general plan.
Oh, really?
But
well,
now
they put it in there.
Now it's in the
there.
general plan, right.
Any more questions for staff?
Go ahead.
I had a real question on utility service condition, where all new and existing on-site electrical and communications lines should be placed underground. On the existing side, there are some pretty big telephone poles and whatnot there. What's expected in this condition from the applicant at any phase in terms of existing electrical?
Are you referring to phone poles on the street?
Yeah.
No, that's not what that condition means.
Okay.
It means on-site.
Just on-site?
On-site utilities, yeah.
Just making sure. Any more questions for staff? No, I think we're going to have a presentation by the applicant. Yeah, come on up and introduce yourself.
I will. Thank you very much. First, I guess I should say I got here by coming on the Emery go-round. So thank you
All right,
for
cool.
all the information on that, and I can attest to its effectiveness.
More than you ever wanted to know. We hope it's running.
Can't see so well here.
Yes.
There we go. Okay. Commissioners and staff of the Emeryville City Planning Commission and community members, I want to thank you for the opportunity to speak to you tonight about Escuela Bilingue Internacional, fondly known as EBI. My name is Erica Terry Derrick. I am the Vice Chair of the Board of Trustees and one of EBI's founding families. I'm humbled to be addressing you this evening on behalf of EBI's 191 students, including my own 2 children, and their families, as well as the school's faculty, staff, volunteers, and generous supporters, many of whom are here tonight. Just want to take a brief minute to ask those guys to stand up so that they can be acknowledged. I'd also like to point out in particular our board chair, Jill Malco, our head of school, John Folk, and Rachel Horsch, who is one of our many dedicated parent volunteers, as well as Liza Sanchez, who is our founder. My task this evening is to tell you about Escuela Bilingue International's founding, its mission, its major milestones, and why the city of Emeryville is a natural place for EBI to make its permanent home. Now in its 5th year, EBI is the brainchild of 2 dedicated and committed parents, Liza and Orlando Sanchez, who wanted to raise the academic profile and appreciation for the Spanish language and the cultures of its native speakers. They realized that despite the vibrancy of our many East Bay neighborhoods and the cities that we enjoy here in the East Bay, and the wealth of educational institutions that those places are home to, that there was a void in our learning community. There was no independent Spanish immersion pre-K through 8th grade school option. Seeing the need and knowing the demand for a high-caliber, independent Spanish immersion program, these 2 trailblazing individuals pulled together a hardworking group of parents, educators, and community supporters to leverage the time, talent, and resources of friends and family in order to form Escuela Bilingue Internacional, the first independent Spanish immersion school in the East Bay. The mission of Escuela Bilingue Internacional is to provide an excellent Spanish-English bilingual education based on the highest international academic standards in an environment that thrives on diversity, fosters global citizenship, and develops the character necessary to recognize that cultural uniqueness is the touchstone of our common humanity. As a parent and a board member and an East Bay resident, I am proud to say that EBI lives its mission every day. This is most obviously evidenced by the impressive list of milestones EBI has marked since opening its doors just 5 short years ago. The most significant of which is the fact that EBI is a fully authorized international baccalaureate school, a hard-earned accreditation which was awarded in record time, making EBI the only school in the East Bay authorized to offer the primary years program of this internationally recognized model. EBI has also sought and earned its certification as a green business. EBI has provided more than $500,000 in financial assistance to its students, far outpacing schools with much longer established schools with endowments and alumni support. In fact, 36% of EBI's families currently receive some form of tuition assistance, and 100% of our families contribute to its annual fund every year. EBI students call Hayward, El Cerrito, Oakland, Berkeley, San Francisco, Orinda, Alameda, and of course, Emeryville home. and those families reflect the diversity of the various communities in which they live, with nearly 60% of students identifying as being of color or mixed race, and coming from households that represent multi-generational families, same-sex couples, single parents, a variety of native tongues, and individuals with varying physical abilities and needs. EBI has made its impressive multinational faculty, rich educational and extracurricular offerings, and unique language immersion model available to students attending nearby public schools, adults seeking language instruction, and children who enroll in its summer programs.